Hello, everyone. Happy June 2nd, 2023. Welcome to SADS Live 119th episode. Great to be with you this afternoon. Beautiful day here. I'm Mike Ackerman, genetic cardiologist at the Mayo Clinic and director of Mayo Clinic's Winland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic and the Winland Smith Rice Sudden Death Genomics Laboratory. And it's on behalf of the SADS Foundation, the Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndrome Foundation, that I bring you greetings, and I'm here on behalf of our CEO, Alice Laura, as we've been together many Fridays now for the past 3+ years. In fact, we started, I think, just a couple months before an amazing thing happened to really a beautiful family, and we'll get to tell that story because we started SADS Live February, I think, of 2020. As this thing called COVID-19 broke out. Remember that? Let's not stroll down memory lane. Let's make some new ones. And for those of you who are joining us, we may get your questions. We may not have time today. So questions, save them up for 2 weeks from today for SADS Live 120 on June 16th. And this is a busy time for us. We at SADS Foundation are joining all of the other advocacy organizations dedicated to the heart and dedicated to saving lives from sudden cardiac arrest caused by a variety of heart conditions, non-genetic coronary artery disease, genetic heart disease, which is what we're about at the SADS Foundation. And we join American Heart Association and those other organizations to create awareness and advocacy as we are now starting the National CPR AED Awareness Week. I think we all know those acronyms: CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, AED, automatic external defibrillator. And we have realized that it is not hard to join the army of survivors to be part of this life-saving mission of when we recognize and notice somebody who's down and out for the count, to activate the chain of survival, call 911, push fast chest compressions. Don't have to do the breathing. Chest compression only CPR. Shock. Well, how do you shock? You grab the automatic external defibrillator, put it on, and follow the instructions. Pretty easy. In fact, there was a study published a few years ago now that showed AED out of the box, a group of 6th graders, and they put it on and followed the directions and activated it only 30 seconds slower than the trained paramedics. That's how easy they are. And we tell our SADS families, let's have an AED as part of your family's safety gear. All of my athletes, elite, less than elite athletes, all of you who have a genetic heart disease, you know that the AED is part of your sports safety gear. You also know, as we have told you, that it will almost for sure never be used on one of our genetic heart disease patients who's treated. It's more likely going to be used on the umpire of the baseball game, the referee of the soccer game. And here, as we celebrate National CPR AED Awareness Week, I actually had that happen a couple months ago. A family of mine, forget which state they flew in from, but they shared with me that during his soccer game, the dad got the AED out of the trunk and used it on the referee, the soccer official of the game, and saved a 60-plus-year-old gentleman's life. In fact, we had his story on one of the SADS Lives programs. Remember that? We'll probably send a link to that, and that was an incredible story. Well, today we have another incredible story, and thankfully it has a very happy ending because of 2 heroes, pilots, co-pilots of Matt, who did something heroic. They were lifesavers, but not on the ground level, at 30,000 feet. And so we're going to hear Matt and Michelle's story, and it's a beautiful story. Thankfully, it has a beautiful ending and a continuation for the new start to the next chapter of his life. And I can't wait for you to hear Matt and Michelle's story. But before they come on, Aaron's going to play a little clip, 60 seconds of a dispatch, not from the house or the swimming pool, but a dispatch that came from 30,000 feet on that Delta flight on May 21st, 2020.
Keep Daddy kisses. Good night. We love you. Fly safely.
Good night, Daddy. We love you.
Delta 3343.
Emergency.
Delta 3343, go ahead.
Yes, sir. We have a flight crew member. He apparently suffered a heart attack. We need to divert to closest airport with cardiac medical facility.
Delta 3343, heavy roger. Crew member had a heart attack, is that correct?
That's correct.
It's one of those moments where you knew his heart and breathing was stopped.
Well, that was the little teaser. I have chills on my arms just hearing that again. So, but let's bring the real individuals up, Matt and Michelle. And it's great to have them join us at SADS Live. Matt and Michelle, hello there.
Hi, Doctor. Great to see you.
Great to see you again. Full disclosure, I have the privilege and the honor of being Matt's cardiologist, and he allowed this program and this story to happen. And I just saw him last week. They're from San Diego, but he came without his wife, and I missed you, Michelle. So good to see you. But we saw in that little preview that there were two very precious reasons why you couldn't join us. Those girls are adorable.
Yes. Braden and Olivia, that actually the video was the night before. So we would always send Matt a video. If he didn't answer our video call, we would send him a video message every single night he was flying saying, good night, we love you, and telling him to fly safely. And that was what we sent May 2020.
Well, that is cute. Good on you doing that for your husband and for daddy. So that's great. Well, you mentioned the night before. So Matt, take us back to the night before. I'm assuming May 2020 was the typical night before, as in every other night before one of your trips?
Yeah. A typical night. I mean, obviously, I think as we all remember now, that was the first wave of the COVID pandemic. So some things were quite different. And in the airline industry, that was especially true. I was in Frankfurt. We were operating what would normally be passenger service, but people weren't flying at that time. So we were operating a cargo flight from Frankfurt back to the US. Everything was normal aside from the lack of passengers and flight attendants on board. So just three of us pilots flying a bunch of mail and parcels back to the US.
Wow. And I remember when I met you a couple years ago now that you had first said, you were flying back from Frankfurt, Germany to O'Hare. And I said, oh, you must fly for United, because my wife's father was a captain for United Airlines. And he said, well, actually it was Delta. And I said, well, that's an unusual route for Delta.
We actually have a funny story on that. So when he actually woke up from his coma, I was telling him numerous times I didn't realize just how short of a memory he would have. So he would ask me what happened and I would tell him. And every single time I said he was flying from Germany to Chicago, he corrected me and said LAX. And I'd say, no, Chicago. And every single time it was just really funny. And then he finally remembered. He actually pulled out his phone and looked and signed in and saw it, that it was going to Chicago.
And you said passengerless for your career as a pilot for Delta and the 777. Was that common for you, or was your career mostly flying people?
No, that was extremely rare. 99.9% of the time we've got passengers on board. In the case of the 777, that'd be 300 people plus a complement of 12 flight attendants. So very different scenario this time around.
And I know in terms of the airline industry, that as we think about CPR AED Awareness Week, that the airline industry in many ways led the way in being one of the first industries to have AEDs on board the planes. And I think, if memory serves me right, Northwestern Airlines, before they were bought by Delta, was the very first airline to have AEDs on board the planes.
Yeah, I think that's correct. If I'm not mistaken, I believe 2004, it became a federal law and, worked out in my favor, obviously having the event on board an aircraft that turned out to be one of the best places to have it because of the medical equipment on board.
And what's the standard drill? Who's in charge of making sure there's an AED on the plane? Typically, like you said, you have your passengers and your complement of 12 flight attendants, for which my wife was one of them for 20 plus years. Yeah. And I was under the impression that the flight attendants were assigned, or is there a point person assigned to make sure there's the AED and the key to open up the cabinet and so forth?
Yeah, so there's multiple layers, as it is with all things airline related when it comes to safety. So there's an enhanced medical kit on board, there's an AED on board, there's a range of other equipment, and that's checked every flight. When they talk about the flight attendants pre-flighting the aircraft and doing their inspections, they're checking to make sure that everything is there and in proper order. And then in addition to that, our maintenance department goes on board and verifies the equipment and makes sure that everything's in proper operating order and accounted for.
But that night or the next day, May 21st, you're in Frankfurt, Germany, you and two fellow co-pilots. Is that still the drill, or was it expected that there would be an AED operational there, or was there an extra safety check that you guys did that time that was different, or was it just part of the standard process?
Yeah, so when it comes to ferry flights, or in this case, a cargo flight, we have a separate checklist that we go through to account for all the items in the cabin and things that would normally be carried out by the flight attendants. Obviously, some of that stuff isn't relevant because there aren't passengers on board, but medical equipment is included in that.
So you wake up that morning, you get that video the night before from your wife and your two precious kids, and you wake up feeling fine?
Yep, felt great. I've been fortunate. I've been able to lead a very healthy lifestyle. I'm very active. I'm fairly conscious about what I eat, trying to do the right things to live that long and healthy life. And when I woke up that morning, it wasn't any different than any other. There were no warning signs, no indications that anything was going on. And I have no previous medical history of any heart-related issues or otherwise.
And so that day was the day. Mm-hmm. There was no pre-warning day, no exertional faint. There was nothing. That happened to be the day it declared itself.
Absolutely correct.
And what was your role of the three of you during that portion of the flight?
Yeah, so on a long flight like that, we have three pilots instead of the usual two, just because it's such a long flight. I happen to be the pilot flying that day. So I'm the one at the controls in the cockpit conducting the takeoff and essentially managing the aircraft while we're in the air. One of the other pilots is in the other seat helping me to monitor things, handling the radios. And then we have the third pilot, who's the relief pilot, and we all swap out and take turns at various times during the flight to take a brief rest break. So I was the pilot flying, and when the event happened, 6.5 hours into the flight, I was sitting there at the controls in the cockpit, feeling normal and no indication that something bad was about to happen.
Wow. And then what?
And then there we were about 6.5 hours into the flight, thankfully over Eastern Canada, when suddenly and without warning, in the blink of an eye, I had a cardiac arrest, lost consciousness, and died. And I don't have any memory of the event, but there were no warning signs, nothing like we've been, I guess, misled by Hollywood movies and otherwise to believe that you're going to have that gasp or that feeling or sensation and you can cry out and seek help. It was quite literally, I'm gone. And thankfully, the gentleman I was flying with happened to notice it at the time.
And as you're told the story of what they did, since you were in La La Land, what has they told you the story afterwards? Because when I hear that, the first 30 seconds of the captain or the co-pilot sharing, I mean, impressively cool and calm at 30,000 feet, announcing that he needs a reroute or whatever?
Yeah, as pilots, we're obviously trained to handle a whole litany of emergencies. That's not one that you typically expect, although a crew member incapacitation is something that we do train for. So when it happened, he reached over, checked for a pulse, checked for breathing, just as you should do when potentially carrying out CPR. And finding neither, he immediately got up out of his seat, recognizing that, hey, this is a large individual. I'm 6'4", 200 pounds, not easily movable by one person. He kept me in the seat right there on the flight deck. He reclined the chair, stood over me, got into position, and immediately began administering CPR.
Wow. And at that time, is he calling the third pilot to go retrieve the AED, or?
Shortly thereafter, yes. So he was dividing his attention between monitoring the aircraft, which is his primary responsibility, and despite all that going on, also administering CPR, which, as you can imagine, the cockpit of a major airliner, even a 777, which is one of the biggest, is not very roomy. So there wasn't a lot of space for him to work with. The fact that he was able to perform CPR in that environment was remarkable in and of itself.
Wow. And so the third guy, he comes running in with the AED and
so it took a little bit of time. The captain, who was the gentleman who was performing CPR on me initially, after probably a minute or two of doing that, recognized that, I wasn't coming back and he was going to need more help. And so he eventually was able to summons the other pilot who was on his rest break, instructed him to go back and get the AED, and, 250 feet to the back of the airplane, he went sprinting back there, got it out of one of the overhead bins where the medical equipment is stored, went running back up, plopped it down on the seat, and then, had to figure out how to use it.
And how did they do that? I mean, they kept you in the recliner chair the whole time?
Yes, they did. So
wow.
you recognizing the environment we're in, this is the flight deck of a commercial airliner. If they're trying to pull me out and one of my legs or arms falls and hits a switch or one of the controls or otherwise, you've just made the problem infinitely worse, because now someone has to take care of the plane rather than letting the autopilot manage it.
Right. And so they get the AED on you, and like those sixth graders I mentioned at the opener, they hit the button.
Yeah. And, one of the remarkable things you spoke earlier about the ease of use. All flight attendants at airlines receive emergency medical training. They all know how to use AEDs, but pilots typically do not, because the flight attendants are the ones who are responsible for the care of anyone on board who suffers a medical issue. So when they brought it up to the flight deck, plopped it down on the seat, here it is. Hey, do you know how to use this? No. Do you? No. Okay. But as you said, it's very intuitive. It comes with very easy to use instructions. Most of them talk to you or have a screen that provides the information. So they were quite readily able to figure out how to use it. And thankfully, in my case, they did. And that helped to bring me back to life.
And was it a single shock restoration to normal rhythm? They only had to hit the button once?
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
That's amazing. And now he says you're back, but obviously you didn't resume flying the plane.
No. At that point, I'm still unconscious. I'm alive, but barely, breathing, have a pulse. And here we are at 40,000 feet. I can't say in the middle of nowhere, but over Eastern Canada. And now once that's resolved and I'm alive, they still have to get us down on the ground. And the captain and the first officer did a phenomenal job at getting us on the ground, declaring that emergency, conducting an emergency descent. We went from 40,000 feet to on the ground in Moncton, Canada in under 15 minutes.
Now that's seriously fast.
It's really fast.
So Michelle, when do you first learn about the night before Have a Great Flight, we love you, Daddy, that something was amiss with that flight? When did you get called into this?
So he was on the ground and I was on a work call. It was 2020, so we were on video, and I kept getting a phone call from Atlanta and I thought it was a client. And then all of a sudden my phone popped up and it said Delta Flight Ops, and I know that that's not a good sign. And my heart dropped and I stood up and I just thought he crashed. And I went to go look online to identify if it was true, because most, crashes are publicized. But I realized there aren't any passengers on planes, so it might not have been. I might not be able to find it, and I need a call. So I called, and the lady immediately just said, "Does Matt have any heart issues or anything in his family?" And my response was, "Is he alive?" And they said, "Yes, we think he had a heart attack." And I was like, "How do you think?" That's what I said to respond. "How do you think he had a heart attack?" And they said, "We won't know for sure what it is until he's in the hands of the hospital." So that was really surprising to me. And I had to call his dad or his mom to find out. His dad had something in the past, but I didn't want to scare her. So I hung up. I called his mom and just calmly said, "Filling out some paperwork for kindergarten. What does Matt's dad have when it comes to the heart?" She told me. I said, "Okay, thanks, bye." Hung up and called back Delta and let them know.
Oh,
and then I lost it.
Yeah. And are you then needing to get yourself to, I don't even know that town. When you first said East Canada, I was thinking, okay, did you guys land in Halifax, Nova Scotia or something? Or
Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada.
Moncton, New
Very
Brunswick.
small location, regional airport.
For which he got you down from 40,000 feet to Moncton in 15 minutes.
Yeah. Usually
so now do you get out there, Michelle, yourself?
Yes,
or, yeah.
I did. So this was 2 weeks after the borders were closed to Canada. But the great thing is Delta said, "We're going to get you out there." And I didn't know how, but I also didn't know what to do with my kids. And thankfully, we have an incredible nanny who's been with us for 7 years now. And she was 22. And she said, "Wherever you need to go. I'm here with the kids. Just go be with Matt." And Delta said, "We're going to get you there. We're going to figure it out. We don't know how. There aren't many passenger planes going, and it's completely opposite sides of the continent." But they found a way to get me to Atlanta, and then they rented a private jet, and they called the Ministry of Health over in Canada and got approval for me to go into Canada, land, and then also had approval for me to be in the hospital room with him.
Wow. Delta rocks.
They did. I will always, they got me a hotel room. They made sure we had food, had a car service driving me back and forth. It was amazing what they did.
Yeah, that's incredible. Not an advertisement, but it is my favorite airline. It is my favorite airline. I fly Delta the most. And my cousin flies for Delta out of the Twin Cities. And I'm still waiting for the day that he and I are on the same plane. And so I'll text Mark and I'll say, "I'm in Minneapolis, ready to head to so-and-so. Are you going to fly me today?" And so far the answer has always been no, which has made me convinced that I'm pretty sure I fly Delta more than my cousin does. So I'm kind of curious, Matt, when they declared that emergency landing and I heard that other pilot say, "I think Matt had a heart attack," did that factor into which airport to land you in, or in terms of maybe being at a city that might have more medical resources? Or was it more, we have to get him down stat, and that meant a smaller airport because that was the immediate one available?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, this really goes into the detailed planning that happens with airline operations. There weren't a lot of options around, but we always know as pilots when we're flying along at any given moment in time where the nearest what we call suitable airport is. Suitable meaning that it can handle a plane of the size or capability that we have, but also has the resources, whether that's fire and rescue at the airport or a nearby medical facility. So that way it's not a mystery, in the heat of the moment, you're not searching for where do we need to go. We always have that planned out ahead of time. And air traffic control helps to facilitate that as well.
Yeah. And it is interesting to hear the term heart attack, which I'm sure you learned afterwards, that those two words convey so many different meanings. And I know we at SADS Foundation and American Heart Association have been working hard to distinguish that what most people think of a heart attack is, "Oh no, one of my coronary vessels that's feeding my heart muscle just got plugged. and I'm having a mild cardiac infarction, an MI, heart attack. And as a result of the heart attack, now I'm having an electrical attack. But then there are others like yours where what you did was, as you said, you did SCA, sudden cardiac arrest, that was heading towards SCD, sudden cardiac death, if the electricity hadn't revived you. And so those families, and that's what's common with many of our families at the SADS Foundation, is there's nothing wrong with their coronary arteries. They're not vulnerable to an MI heart attack. They're vulnerable to that electrical attack. And I don't think we've done very well yet of communicating the distinction between those two phenomenon. And I'm wondering, now you're there, Michelle, and they're doing the drill on your husband to try to figure out, why did he do what he did at 40,000 feet? What, and you said he was in a coma, so I assume they cooled him and things like that.
Yeah.
What were you learning along the way? What was being communicated? And
yeah, I learned so much because, as you said, like, I couldn't believe that it was a heart attack. He's an athlete. He eats so well. He brings his food on the flights. I couldn't understand it. But then when we spoke with the cardiologist on the ground, he said it's absolutely a cardiac arrest. And I had to have them explain to me, what's the difference? So they explained it to me, and it was really interesting to learn. And so I was able to communicate it out to the families, because of course that was the communication with everybody here. And when we were there, I was there for 4 days while he was still induced. The cardiologists were great. They were constantly educating me. They actually brought up your name, Dr. Ackerman, and said, we're emailing Dr. Ackerman. He has this great program. He knows everything when it comes to it. And we're going to see what he has to say. So that was the first time I ever heard your name. And you actually responded to them and helped them with their course with Matt in Canada.
And as we know, they searched really hard to try to find the why.
Yes, they did.
And because they couldn't find an obvious why, then they gave you, instead of your flying machine, they gave you your own little internal machine. Is that right?
That's right. As one of my very good friends here, as his son pointed out when we got back and I was showing the ICD here in my chest, you're Iron Man now. Yeah, I've got my own little device here, my own little internal defibrillator that's there, and that's my safety net.
Yeah. And I'll share with the SADS Foundation families that many of the families, their why is some sort of genetic heart disease. It might go by the name of long QT syndrome or Brugada syndrome, CPVT, ARVC, those kind of things. But there's no name like that attached to Matt's. And instead, Matt's story is one where the name, as best as we can figure it out, is something called PVC triggered VF, where a non-genetic reason that for whatever reason, there was a rogue site in his LV pump that site decided to go rogue and initiate a PVC, which normally are completely boring, completely normal. But that one, that time, then triggered Matt's VF episode. And so the silver lining working through that is Matt came to Mayo Clinic, met probably the smartest human being I've ever encountered in my life, named Dr. Sam Asirvatham, and had an ablation, because most of our patients don't get an ablation, but Matt did. And so far, so good with the Map It, Zap It, where Dr. Asirvatham found the site, successfully ablated the site. And for now, we're almost approaching 3 years of no blips on the screen, no hiccups, no nothing. And you look great. You're back working out full time. But with that little thing that happened up in the air, that so far had a dramatic impact on your profession, going from an elite 777 pilot to Delta.
Yes, to no longer flying, unfortunately. One of the restrictions, pretty much the only restriction I have at this point, because I'm able to exercise, I'm able to drive a car, is I'm no longer allowed to fly airplanes. And that's due to an FAA regulation that says if you've got an internal defibrillator, you are disqualifying from holding an FAA medical clearance. So I'm no longer flying for Delta. I still work for the company in the corporate security department and very much enjoy my new role. But as you can imagine, really, really tough pill to swallow when, you wake up from an event like this 4 days after it happens and find out that your career is over.
Yeah. How have you guys dealt with that these last 2.5, 3 years? That's a doozy.
Well, that's the fun part of a relationship that's based on me being gone 3 to 4 days a week to then suddenly changing, as a lot of us, I think, experienced during COVID, but being home 7 days a week and working remotely. So it's an adjustment. We've gotten to know each other even better. And, there's some speed bumps along the way, but it's been good. And for me, getting to spend the additional time with Michelle and our 2 children has been fantastic.
Mm-hmm. How about for you, Michelle? What has been the biggest adjustment?
Him being home. I mean, I was so glad he survived, and I would tell him that, and I still do almost every single day. Thank you for surviving. But there were times that I would say, thank you for surviving, but can you please leave my office? I need to get work done. And I would always preface it that way. I'm very grateful that he's here. And he had such a slim chance to be here. But yes, we at that point knew each other for 15 years. And as Matt said, he was gone 3-4 nights a week, every week for 15 years. So it was quite the adjustment, but it was really cool because our son was so young. He was 18 months old, and he was able to be with daddy quite a bit, where Olivia, our daughter, had more of time of him being away. So it was really great to see that. And just the fact that they have their dad was the biggest thing to me. I was so glad they had their dad.
Well, as our SADS families know, a lot of them have been told, sorry, no more of this, no more of that. And we've been breaking barriers and boundaries left and right. One of our athletes who was told no is now in the NBA. One of our patients won the silver medal in the Olympics. They were told, no sports for you, no nothing. Don't get off the couch. Don't do chocolate. No, can't. And we have one with genetic heart disease who apparently is at some level of the military that doesn't even have a name. So whatever is above Green Beret, Delta, whatever, doing that despite at one time saying, sorry, can't do that here. And so I think the next no that needs to be saying wrong answer is when I get to hear on a Delta flight, not my cousin Mark on the announcer saying this is Captain Mark, but to hear this is Captain Matt, welcome aboard Delta flight such, and maybe even a shout out to me in the back.
We would, for sure.
I think we can pull some strings on that.
Yeah.
But during the meantime, while you've been waiting to get reinstated and for us to break that no and change that no to a yes, and for the SADS families out there, stay tuned. No is going to someday be a yes. And I can't wait for that day and to be flown by Matt. But until then, you guys have channeled some of your energy with your experience to advocacy. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to spread the word, not just during this 1 week of June of AED Awareness Week. What have you been doing to get the word out in the channels that you've been blessed to use?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the additional blessings, aside from still being alive, is having the opportunity to share the story with people. And I think for all of us, if you've learned CPR at some point in your life, or at least heard of it, you recognize, hey, there's an opportunity here to potentially save a life. But having been there and experienced it firsthand, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And something as simple as learning CPR with an hour-long course or whatever it is that stays with you for the rest of your life. And one of the things that we emphasize is, in my case, the gentleman who saved my life, Captain T. Lee, he learned CPR 30 years ago during his time in the Air Force, but it stayed with him. He remembered it. And when, I died, it immediately triggered in his head, and he went right back to the foundation of what he had learned 30 years prior. And that's what helped to save my life. And being able to share that with people, because odds are, the life you save is going to be somebody close to you. It's going to be a friend or family member that suddenly and unexpectedly, experiences a heart attack, experience a cardiac arrest. And it's something so simple, but so powerful.
Yeah, I can't wait to meet Captain Lee as well and to thank him because of him and his heroic action, which was a normal action. I mean, we can create an army of first responders by having all of us learn CPR as a high school graduation requirement at minimum. Learn how to do the call 911. That's really easy. Call 911. Do the push CPR fast. Grab the AED and hit the button. And if we can all be like Captain Lee. But I look forward to thanking him because he gave me the privilege of getting to be counted as your cardiologist and to take care of you and your wife and your family and knowing that I don't really have to be taking care of your kids because your thing wasn't a genetic thing. Yeah. You had your own version for which, thanks to Dr. Asarvatham, problem solved, FAA. So get ready over there. That pen is going to start changing no to yes if we have our say in the matter. And so I'm just grateful for the two of you. Michelle, before we end, you guys did a really neat thing in Atlanta for AHA.
Yeah.
Tell the story. What was that like?
It was very interesting. So we Matt worked with AHA and Delta, and they were able to collaborate. We got into a hangar and they gave us a 767. We recreated exactly what happened and made a video about Matt's story. They interviewed T. Lee at the beginning. They interviewed me. They made me ask a lot of questions. And at the very end, they made the one trigger one that just had me crying. And they said, that's the one we're putting in the video. Yeah. So put in the video, and we went out to Atlanta. We had a gala. They released the entire video, raised money, we raised awareness. And we use it now here in San Diego as well. But we're always taking that video and trying to raise awareness to AED. I would have been scared of using one before, but now I know that it's as easy as listening to its directions and anybody can do it.
What was that trigger question?
What were you thinking when you were told that Matt had less than a 10% chance of survival?
Yeah, that's triggering.
What would life be without Matt? Because that's, of course, what I thought about the entire time. There was no way I thought he was going to survive this, especially since he had 12 more on the ground. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you didn't have to come up with an answer or a real answer to that question. And we're doing what we're doing now 3 years later. And thanks for what you've been doing with AHA. And thanks for joining us at the SADS Foundation. And for those who want to learn CPR and AED, you can join us at the SADS Foundation on my birthday on June 7th. The SADS Foundation is hosting a 1-hour live webinar to provide free CPR training because of One Beat Medical, another entity that is out there teaching CPR and rapid AED response. So go ahead and sign up. Courtney just signed up for the webinar. Great, Courtney. I'm glad you did, and have a great time there. And if you sing happy birthday fast enough, you'll be doing CPR, the compression at the right speed. So you could even think of yours truly. And Evelyn, I love that you enjoyed this program. For all of you who joined us today, send this program when you get it, forward the YouTube, the tweet, whatever platform, and have as many watch this so that they can hear a beautiful story. And I'm glad it is a beautiful story that we get to tell. And Matt and Michelle, thanks for telling it and sharing it with me. And as you know, we will be in close touch.
Yes.
and get practicing on that announcement. You're 3 years rusty on making those announcements. So start standing in front of the mirror and get practicing, because that is what my expectation is. And as the SADS families know, I'm pretty relentless. I hate losing, and I want victory to happen for all of my patients and all of our SADS families. So, and I expect no less than you've already had your victory for you and your family, but now that's been 3 years ago. So now it's time for a new kind of victory. Mm-hmm. And so we will all work for that together. So that's a wrap, everybody. Join me again in 2 weeks for your questions and my attempts at your answers on SADS Live number 120. Until then, take this program and circulate it far and wide if you were inspired by Matt and Michelle's story of what almost never happens at 40,000 feet. So until the next time, be well, everyone. Have no fear, and blessings to you all.